Captain Day-Wan stood at the massive viewing window of the human starship Resilience and watched the stars flicker past them in the endless darkness of space. His hands gripped the metal railing as he stared out at the void that seemed to stretch forever in all directions. The ship hummed quietly around him with the sound of engines and life support systems, keeping his crew alive in the hostile environment of deep space behind him. The bridge buzzed with activity as his officers worked at their stations. The soft glow of computer screens cast blue and green light across their faces as they monitored the ship's systems and tracked their position in the galaxy. Captain Day-One had been in command of the Resilience for 3 years now, and he had never seen his crew look so worried. Lieutenant got away from her communications console and walked over to where the captain stood. Her face was pale and her hands shook slightly as she held a data pad filled with incoming messages from across the galaxy. The messages had been coming in for hours now, and each one was worse than the last. Captain, the emergency broadcasts are still coming in from the Outer Rim colonies, she said quietly. Her voice carried the weight of terrible news that no one wanted to hear, but everyone needed to know the situation out there is getting worse by the hour. Day-One nodded slowly and took the data pad from her hands. He had been expecting this moment for days now, ever since the first reports had reached them about the strange plague that was spreading through the outer regions of the galaxy. The plague was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. It moved fast and it killed faster. The data pad showed him a map of the galaxy with red dots marking the infected systems. The red was spreading like spilled blood across the star charts, consuming entire solar systems in its path. 3 alien species were facing complete extinction: the Valari, with their beautiful crystal bodies that glowed like living diamonds; the Threnks, who lived in massive cities that looked like giant insect hives; and the Makari, who breathed liquid methane and lived in underwater cities on their ocean worlds. What does the Galactic Council say about this? Day-One asked, even though he already knew the answer would not be good. Edgen looked down at her feet and then back up at her captain. They have made their decision, sir. Complete quarantine of all infected systems. No ships are allowed in or out. They are pulling back all council fleets and abandoning the Outer Rim entirely. One felt his heart sink as he heard the words he had been dreading. The Galactic Council was the governing body that was supposed to protect all the species in the galaxy, but when faced with a crisis that required sacrifice and courage, they had chosen the easy path. They would let 3 entire civilizations die rather than risk the plague spreading to their own. He sat. Jin pressed a button on her console, and the main viewing screen filled with the image of Council President Vexstar, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms. His voice was cold and emotionless as he spoke to the galaxy citizens of the galaxy. The Council has voted on the matter of the Outer Rim plague. After careful consideration, we have decided that the risk of contamination is too great. All ships are ordered to withdraw from the quarantine zone immediately. Any vessel that enters the infected systems will be considered contaminated and will not be permitted to return to Council space. This decision is final. The screen went dark and the bridge fell silent. Captain Day-One could hear the quiet breathing of his crew members as they all processed what they had just heard. The Council was abandoning millions of innocent beings to die alone in the darkness of space. Sir, we are receiving distress calls from the infected systems, Lieutenant Kyungsu said from his position at the tactical station. His voice was tight with emotion as he listened to the desperate pleas coming through his headset. Put them through. Day-One ordered. The bridge speakers crackled to life with the sound of voices calling out in languages both familiar and strange. The universal translator worked to convert their words into human speech, but it could not translate the raw fear and desperation in their voices. This is Crystal Singer Valana of the Valari homeworld. Our people are dying. The light is leaving our bodies, and we are becoming dark and cold. Please, someone help us. We have children here. They are so young, and they are afraid. The transmission cut to static and was replaced by another voice. This one came from a Threnks colony, and the speaker sounded like he was struggling to think. Clearly human ships. This is Hivemon THRX of the Western colonies. The sickness is in our minds now. We cannot think straight. We are destroying our own cities. Please help us before we lose ourselves completely. A third voice joined the chorus of desperation. This one came from a Mokari world, and the speaker was clearly crying as she spoke. Friends of the galaxy, this is Deep Swimmer. Mokara, our ocean cities are dying, the plague turns. Our methane sees into poison, we are the last ones alive in the deep places. Will anyone remember us when we are gone, Captain? Day One closed his eyes and listened to the voices of the dying. The council had abandoned them, but that did not mean everyone. The human fleet was small compared to the massive council armadas, but they were brave, and they had good hearts. He opened his eyes and looked around at his crew. He could see the same thoughts in their faces that were running through his own mind. They were thinking about their families back on Earth and about the risks of entering the quarantine zone. But they were also thinking about the children in those distress calls. Commander Taman, the ship's chief medical officer, stepped forward from where he had been listening to the broadcasts. Captain, if we enter the quarantine zone, we might never be able to return home. The council will not let us back into safe space. Hadeen One nodded. I know the risks, Commander, but those people out there are dying and no one else is going to help them. But, sir, we only have 18 ships. The plague has already killed billions of people. What can we possibly do against something that powerful? The captain looked out at the stars again and thought about the choice that lay before them. It was true that 18 human ships could not save entire civilizations from extinction, but they could try. They could show the galaxy that some people still believed in doing what was right even when it was dangerous. Signal the other ships in our fleet, he ordered. Hagen, tell them we are going to enter the quarantine zone. Any captain who wants to withdraw from the mission can do so now. With no Shimichin sent the message to the 17 other human vessels that made up their small fleet. One by one, the responses came back. Every single ship volunteered to enter the quarantine zone. None of them wanted to abandon the dying aliens, Captain. Daewon took a deep breath and gave the order. That would change everything. Set course for the Valari system. Maximum speed. We have people to save. Its resilience and her sister ships turned away from the safety of council space and headed into the unknown dangers of the quarantine zone behind them. The rest of the galaxy continued its normal business, while 3 civilizations faced their final hours. But 18 human ships were on their way, and they carried with them something that had been missing from the galaxy for too long: hope. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Valari Prime, and Captain Daewon immediately knew they had arrived too late. The planet that should have been glowing like a giant jewel in space was now dim and fading. The Valari were beings made of living crystal, and their cities normally shone with beautiful light that could be seen from orbit, but now the light was dying. Engineer Su Young worked frantically at her scanner station, trying to get readings from the planet below. Her instruments showed massive power failures across the surface, and the energy signatures that indicated Valari life were growing weaker by the hour. Captain, the planetary defense grid is not responding, she reported. There are no ships in orbit, and I am detecting massive system failures in their major cities. D1 studied the data on his command screen. The Valari had always been a peaceful species who used their natural ability to channel energy through their crystal bodies to power their technology. But the plague was draining that energy away, leaving them powerless and dying. Prepare landing teams, he ordered. We are going down to the surface. Heijin, send a message to the other ships in our fleet. Tell them to spread out and check the other Valari colonies. The shuttle bay of the Resilience was busy with activity as the crew prepared for their first mission into the infected zone. Dr. Taman checked his medical equipment while security teams loaded their gear. Marine Captain Wu Sung made sure everyone had their environmental suits properly sealed. The plague was still a mystery to them. They did not know how it spread or if humans could catch it. The only protection they had were their sealed suits and the hope that human biology was different enough from the alien species to provide some natural immunity. The shuttle landed in the main square of Velkondra, the capital city of Velar Prime. The buildings around them were made of the same crystal material as the Velar themselves, but they were dark and cracked. The beautiful songs that the Valari crystal structures normally produced were silent. Captain Daewon led his team through the empty streets toward the largest building in the city, which their scans showed still had some power. The silence was eerie, and their footsteps echoed off the crystal walls. As they walked inside the building, they found the first living Valari. The being was sitting in what appeared to be a medical facility, surrounded by dozens of others who were clearly dying. The Valari looked up at the humans with eyes that flickered with weak light. Lu came, the Valari said in a voice like wind chimes. The universal translator in their suits converted the musical language into words they could understand. We did not think anyone would come to our Taman, immediately began scanning the sick. Valari with his medical equipment, the readings were unlike anything he had ever seen. The plague was not just killing them, it was somehow draining the energy that made them alive. What is happening to your people? He asked gently. The light is leaving us, the Valari replied. Our children are becoming dark and cold. We cannot power our cities anymore soon. We will all be just empty crystal shells. Engineer Su Young was already working on the power systems in the medical facility. She had brought portable human power cells and was trying to connect them to the Valari equipment. It was difficult work because human and Valari technology were completely different. Captain, I think I can get their life support systems running again, she called out. The power requirements are massive, but if we can boost their energy levels, it might slow down the plague. While Su Young worked on the power systems navigator, Minho was coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. The Thranx colonies were reporting similar problems. The insect-like aliens who lived in perfect harmony were going insane before they died. The plague was affecting their hive minds and causing them to destroy their own cities. The Mokari were facing a different horror. Their methane seas were being poisoned by the plague, and their underwater cities were becoming uninhabitable. The aquatic aliens were being forced to flee to the surface where they could not survive for long. Dire Taman made his first breakthrough while treating a young Valari who was barely alive. The plague was not just one disease, it was actually 3 different bioweapons, each designed specifically to attack a different species. The Valari version drained their energy. The Thranx version attacked their neural networks. The Mokari version poisoned their breathing medium. This is not natural, he told Captain Day 1. Someone made this, someone designed these diseases to kill these specific species. The implications were terrifying. If the plague was artificial, then it meant someone had deliberately tried to wipe out 3 entire civilizations. But it also gave them hope. If the diseases were made by intelligent beings, then intelligent beings could find a way to stop them. Su Young finally managed to connect the human power cells to the Valari medical equipment. The effect was immediate. The young Valari patient began to glow brighter, and the readings on the medical monitors improved at work. She shouted with excitement, "We can give them the energy they need to fight the plague." News spread quickly through the human fleet. Teams of engineers and medics began working around the clock to set up power stations and medical facilities on all the infected worlds. It was dangerous work, and several humans died when their environmental suits failed or when they were exposed to the plague, but slowly they began to make progress. The Valari started calling them the Lightbringers because they brought power back to their dying cities. The Thranx named them Mind Clearers because human neural interface technology could help stabilize their damaged hive minds. The Mokari called them simply friends because they were the only ones who had come to help. Lieutenant Kyung-Soo was working with a team of Thranx engineers to understand their technology. The insect aliens were incredibly intelligent when their minds were clear, but the plague made them confused and aggressive. It took patience and careful communication to work with them. The Mokari presented different challenges. Their methane-breathing environment was deadly to humans, so all contact had to be done through sealed systems, but the aquatic aliens were grateful for any help they could get, and they shared their knowledge freely. After 2 weeks of constant work, Dr. Taman had developed the first treatments. The diseases were complex, but they followed patterns that could be understood and countered. Each species needed different medicines and different approaches, but all 3 could be helped them. Breakthrough came when they realized that human genetic diversity was the key. Humans had evolved on a world with many different environments and challenges. This had given them immune systems that could adapt to almost anything. The other species had evolved in more stable environments, and their immune systems were more specialized. By using human antibodies and adapting them for each species, they could create treatments that worked. The process was slow and required constant monitoring, but it was working. Infected aliens who had been dying began to recover. The first time a Valari child laughed and began to glow with healthy light, the entire medical team knew they had found the answer. The first time, a Thranx worker spoke clearly and began to repair his damaged hive. The engineers knew their work was paying off. The first time a Mokari family was reunited in clean methane seas, the whole fleet celebrated, but their celebration was cut short when Navigator Minho detected something disturbing on the long-range sensors. Ships were approaching the quarantine zone, a lot of ships, and they were not coming to help. Captain Daewon studied the sensor readings and felt his blood run cold. The ships were military vessels belonging to species he did not recognize. They were heavily armed, and they were heading straight for the worlds that the humans were trying to save. It seemed that someone did not want the plague victims to survive. Lieutenant Kyung-soo had always been good with numbers and patterns. It was what made him an excellent tactical officer aboard the Resilience. While the medical teams worked to cure the plague, he spent his time analyzing the sensor data and looking for clues about how the disease had spread. He found made him sick to his stomach. Captain Din listened carefully as Kyung-soo presented his findings in the ship's briefing room. The other senior officers were there too, including
Dr. Tommen,
who looked exhausted from weeks of treating plague victims. "The pattern is too perfect, sir," Kyung-soo said as he displayed a holographic map of the infected systems. The plague appeared simultaneously in 12 different locations across 3 different species territories. "The chances of a natural outbreak happening like this are basically zero." Commander Taman leaned forward in his chair. "What are you saying, Lieutenant I? Am saying this was planned? The plague was deployed deliberately. Someone wanted these 3 species dead." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Captain Daewon had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. 3 entire civilizations had been targeted for extinction, and the rest of the galaxy had just walked away. Intelligence officer Jae-hoon had been monitoring communications traffic throughout the quarantine zone. He had intercepted coded transmissions that painted an even darker picture. "Sir, I have been tracking encrypted messages between unknown ships outside the quarantine zone. The messages are in a code I cannot break, but the transmission patterns suggest coordination between multiple fleets. Show me what you have found." Day 1, Order Jae-hoon activated another holographic display that showed the locations of the mysterious transmissions. The signals were coming from ships positioned around the outer edge of the quarantine zone, like predators waiting for their prey to die. Have also detected unusual energy signatures from several of the transmission sources. The ships are using advanced stealth technology that is more sophisticated than anything the Council species are supposed to have. Navigator Minho had been working with the alien survivors to understand their recent history. The Valari, Thrinks, and Mokari had all reported strange incidents in the months before the plague appeared. Ships had been seen in their systems conducting what appeared to be scientific surveys. That the Valari told me that unknown vessels had been collecting samples from their crystal formations. Minho reported the Thranks remember ships scanning their hive structures, and the Makari had detected unauthorized probes in their methane seas. Dr. Taman suddenly understood the full scope of what had happened. Someone had been studying these species, learning their biology and their weaknesses. Then they had created specific bioweapons designed to kill each species in the most efficient way possible. "This was not just murder," he said quietly. "This was genocide." The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the biggest shock came when Communications Officer Hae Jin managed to decrypt one of the intercepted messages. The code was complex but human. Computer systems were more advanced than the aliens had expected. "Captain, you need to see this," she said as she displayed the translated message on the main screen. The message was short but terrifying. "Phase 1 complete. All 3 target species are at less than 10% population council withdrawal. Confirmed. Phase 2 begins in 72 hours. Colonization fleet standing by." Captain Daewon felt anger building inside him like a fire.
Oh,
The galaxy had not just abandoned the dying aliens, it had been part of a plan to kill them. The mysterious fleets were waiting for the plague to finish its work so they could move in and claim the empty worlds. "Who sent this message?" he demanded. Hejin worked at her console trying to trace the signal back to its source. The transmission originated from a ship using hegemony encryption protocols. Hegemony was a shadowy alliance of some of the galaxy's most powerful species. They claimed to be a trade organization, but everyone knew they were really about gaining control of resources and territory. 3 plague-affected species controlled strategic locations and valuable resources that the hegemony wanted. Intelligence Officer Jae-hoon had been researching the hegemony, and what he found was even more disturbing. The organization included several species that were members of the Galactic Council. The same council that had voted to abandon the plague victims, sir. I believe the council abandonment was not cowardice, was part of the plan. Some council members are working with the hegemony to clear out the target species. The conspiracy was larger than anyone had imagined. The Galactic Council, the organization that was supposed to protect all species in the galaxy, had been infiltrated by those who wanted to commit genocide rather than fight 3 wars to conquer the target worlds. The hegemony had simply created a plague to wipe out the inhabitants. Captain Day One looked around the briefing room at his officers. They were all thinking the same thing. The 18 human ships were not just trying to save 3 species from a plague, were standing between the hegemony and their victims. The odds were impossible. The hegemony fleets that were approaching numbered in the hundreds of ships, while the humans had only 18, but the captain had not come this far to give up. Now what are our options, he asked. Tactical officer Kung Su had been running combat simulations. The results were not encouraging. The hegemony ships were larger and more heavily armed than the human vessels. In a straight fight, the humans would be destroyed in minutes. We have advantages they do not expect, he said. We have allies now. The Valari Thranks and Makari are recovering, and they want to fight for their homes. Each species has unique technologies that we can use. Engineer Suyang had been working closely with the alien survivors and had learned about their capabilities. The Valari could focus energy into incredibly powerful weapons. The Thranks could manufacture equipment at amazing speeds. The Makari could operate in environments that would kill other species. If we can coordinate their abilities with our tactics, we might have a chance, she said. D'Artagnan was already preparing for the worst. The medical bay was being converted into a combat hospital, and he was training alien medics to treat human injuries. The 3 species wanted to help in any way they could. The first hegemony scout ships entered the quarantine zone 3 days later. They were expecting to find dead worlds ready for colonization. Instead, they found human ships defending recovered alien populations. Captain Day One opened communications with the lead hegemony vessel. His message was simple and direct. This is Captain Day One of the Human Defense Fleet. You are entering sovereign territory of the Valari Thranks and Makari peoples. Turn back. Now the reply came from Admiral Kexvor of the hegemony. The First Fleet, his voice was filled with arrogance and contempt. Human captain, you are in violation of the quarantine zone. You have no authority here. These worlds belong to the hegemony. Now, captain. Dewan looked around his bridge at the crew members who had followed him into the quarantine zone. They had known this moment would come, and they were ready. The reply he sent back would become famous throughout the galaxy. Admiral, these people are under our protection. If you want them dead, you will have to go through us first. Hegemony fleet began to advance, and the first shots of the war were fired. Human ships might have been outnumbered, but they were fighting for something the hegemony could never understand. They were fighting for the right of 3 species to exist. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity said no to genocide. The first battle of the war took place in the space around Thranks Colony 7. Admiral Dong Hein had taken command of the human fleet after Captain Day One was promoted to overall strategic commander. The hegemony had expected an easy victory against a handful of human ships, but they had not counted on the determination of beings who fought for others rather than themselves. Hegemony battleship Dominion opened fire first, its massive energy cannons sending deadly beams toward the human destroyer Swift. Justice Captain Thejin rolled her ship hard to port, and the energy blast missed by mere meters. Her crew worked frantically to return fire with their smaller weapons, but the humans were not fighting alone. Valari crystal ships emerged from behind the nearby moon, their hulls glowing with stored energy. The Valari had learned to weaponize their natural ability to channel power and their energy. Beams could punch through shields that stopped conventional weapons. The Thranks contributed swarms of small fighter craft that moved like angry insects around the larger ships. Each fighter was piloted by a Thranks warrior whose hive mind connection allowed perfect coordination. They attacked in patterns that confused the hegemony. Gunners who were used to fighting individual pilots from the methane clouds of the outer system, Makari ships launched surprise attacks. The aquatic aliens could survive in environments that would kill other species, and they used this advantage to hide where enemies could not follow. A Makari torpedo struck the hegemony cruiser Conquest and tore a massive hole in its hull. Admiral Dong Hein coordinated the mixed fleet from the bridge of the Resilience. It was chaos trying to manage ships with different technologies and different fighting styles, But somehow it worked. The aliens fought with desperate courage, while the humans provided tactical leadership. The battle turned when Marine Colonel Wusong led a boarding party onto the hegemony flagship. They used Thrank's tunneling equipment to cut through the hull and Vellery energy weapons to fight their way to the bridge. The hegemony crew had never faced enemies who fought at close quarters with such intensity. Captain Hejin commanded the communications during the battle, coordinating between species that had never worked together before. The universal translators were working overtime as orders were given in human Korean Vellery, Crystal Song, Thrank's Buzz language, and Mokari liquid speech. When the smoke cleared, the hegemony had lost 12 ships, while the coalition had lost only 4, but the cost in lives was high. The human destroyer Defiant had been destroyed with all hands, and hundreds of brave aliens had died defending their homes. The victory was just the beginning. News of the battle spread across the galaxy, and the hegemony's secret plan was exposed. Other species began to question why the Galactic Council had abandoned the plague victims so quickly. Some even began to send aid to the quarantine zone. D'Artaman worked around the clock, treating wounded from 4 different species. He was learning their biologies under combat conditions, patching up Vellery crystal fractures, treating Thrank's neural damage, and helping Mokari, who had been poisoned by oxygen exposure. Engineer Soo-young had the impossible job of keeping human and alien technology working together. She rigged Vellery energy systems to power human weapons and connected equipment to human computers. Her workshop looked like a mad scientist's laboratory. The hegemony response was swift and brutal. They sent 3 more fleets to crush the rebellion before it could spread. Admiral Kexivore was determined to finish what the plague had started, even if it meant destroying the valuable worlds they had wanted to claim. Second battle took place near Vellery Prime, where the crystal beings had set up massive energy collectors in orbit. The hegemony fleet was twice the size of the first one, but the coalition had grown to more. Alien survivors had joined the fight, and they had been building new ships in the Thranks factory's fighter pilot, the Gin, had been promoted to squadron leader after her heroics in the first battle. She led a mixed group of human Thranks and Vellery fighters against the hegemony bombers that were trying to destroy the orbital platforms. Dogfight was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Human pilots used hit-and-run tactics, while Thrank's fighters swarmed their targets. Vellery ships could channel energy through their hulls to create devastating attacks. The hegemony pilots were skilled, but they had never faced such coordinated chaos. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ships burned and died in the vacuum of space, while crews fought with everything they had. The hegemony had more ships, but the coalition forces fought with the desperation of beings who had nothing left to lose. The turning point came when the Mokari revealed their secret weapon. A massive submarine that had been converted into a spaceship emerged from the methane clouds of a nearby gas giant. The ship was filled with Mokari warriors, who had volunteered for a suicide mission. The submarine rammed straight into the hegemony flagship, breaking through its shields and armor. The Mokari warriors fought their way through the ship, destroying critical systems before the vessel exploded. The loss of their command ship threw the hegemony fleet into confusion. Admiral Dong Haen seized the opportunity and ordered a full assault. The coalition ships charged forward with human vessels providing covering fire, while alien ships used their unique abilities to maximum effect. The hegemony fleet broke and retreated, leaving behind 37 destroyed ships, but victory came at a terrible price. The human cruiser Courage had been destroyed along with 2 Vellery crystal ships and dozens of Thrank's fighters. The Mokari submarine and all its crew were gone. The coalition was winning battles, but losing the war of attrition. The third major battle took place at the Nexus point, where 3 hyperspace routes converged. Control of this system would determine who controlled access to the outer rim. The hegemony threw everything they had at the coalition in a final, desperate assault. Battle lasted 3 days and nights. Ship after ship fell to enemy fire as both sides fought with everything they had left. Captain Daewon led the defense from the bridge of the Resilience, coordinating a fleet that was down to 47 ships against over 100 hegemony vessels on. The second day, the hegemony broke through the outer defenses and began bombing the Mokari colonies below. The Aquatic aliens fought back with everything they had, but their cities were being destroyed. One by one, it was then that the impossible happened. Reinforcements arrived from across the galaxy. Species that had been neutral in the conflict had finally chosen sides. A fleet of ships from dozens of different civilizations dropped out of hyperspace and joined the battle. Hegemony found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. The galaxy had finally seen the truth about what was happening in the quarantine zone, and decent beings everywhere had decided to act. The final assault was led by Captain Day Wan himself. He took the Resilience on a direct attack run against the Hegemony flagship. Using the ship as a guided missile, the collision destroyed both vessels, but it broke the enemy's will to fight. The surviving Hegemony ships fled into hyperspace, and the war was over. The Coalition had saved 3 species from extinction and shown the galaxy that there was another way to live among the stars, but the cost had been enormous. Of the 18 human ships that had entered the quarantine zone, only 4 remained. Thousands of humans had died, along with countless alien allies. The survivors were exhausted and traumatized, but they had won something. More important than a battle, they had proven that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. The final battle would be remembered as the most desperate fight in galactic history. The Hegemony had regrouped and returned with a massive fleet, determined to finish what they had started. The coalition of humans and alien survivors faced impossible odds at the nexus point where 3 major hyperspace routes met. Admiral Dong Han stood on the bridge of the damaged cruiser. Determination, watching enemy ships pour out of hyperspace like an endless swarm. Captain Day Wan was gone, killed when the Resilience rammed the Hegemony flagship. But his sacrifice had inspired every survivor to fight harder. The Coalition fleet was down to 47 ships against 112 Hegemony vessels. The math was simple and brutal, but the survivors had learned that mathematics did not always determine the outcome of battles fought with heart and courage. Communications officer Heijin had been promoted to captain after her ship was destroyed in the previous battle. She now commanded the destroyer. Hope and coordinated communications between the diverse Coalition fleet. Her console showed ships from dozens of species, all working together in ways that should have been impossible. Captain, the Threnx fighters are in position, she reported. The Valari energy platforms are charging, and the Mokari submarines are ready to emerge from the gas giant. The battle plan was complex because it had to account for so many different types of ships and fighting styles. The humans provided tactical coordination, while each alien species used their unique abilities. The Threnx built and launched fighters faster than the enemy could destroy them. The Valari focused their entire civilization's energy into devastating weapons. The Mokari used their ability to survive in hostile environments to launch surprise attacks. Engineer Su Young was aboard the factory ship production, working frantically to repair damaged vessels and build new weapons. She had become expert at combining human and alien technology in ways that should not have worked, but somehow did. Her latest creation was a hybrid torpedo that used Valari energy cores and Threnx guidance systems. First wave of attacks came from Hegemony long-range missiles designed to destroy the Coalition ships before they could get close enough to use their mixed technologies. Admiral Dong Haiyan ordered evasive maneuvers, but several ships were hit, including the Mokari vessel. Deep Current Dr. Taemin was running the medical operations from the hospital. Ship Mercy, treating wounded from multiple species under combat conditions. He had learned to work with alien medical equipment and alien biology, but the casualties were overwhelming. Hegemony expected their superior numbers to win quickly, but they had not counted on the determination of beings who were fighting for survival. The Coalition ships used unconventional tactics that confused the enemy. Commander's fighter pilot Dejen led a squadron of mixed human and alien fighters on a desperate attack run against the Hegemony flagship. Her fuel was running low, and her weapons were nearly depleted, but she pressed on, knowing that her comrades were counting on her. The breakthrough came when the Mokari revealed their most desperate gambit. A massive submarine that had been converted into a spaceship emerged from the crushing depths of a nearby gas giant the vessel was filled with Mokari volunteers who had accepted that they would not survive the mission. The submarine was designed to operate in the methane atmosphere of gas giants, where the pressure would crush normal ships. It could survive direct hits that would destroy conventional vessels, the Mokari crew piloted their ships straight into the heart of the hegemony formation. Enemy concentrated their fire on the submarine, but it kept coming. The Mokari inside were dying from the intense radiation and pressure, but they held their course. The submarine struck the hegemony flagship and both ships exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire battlefield. With their command ship destroyed, the hegemony fleet lost coordination. Admiral Deng Haiyan ordered the final assault, and the coalition ships charged forward with everything they had left. The battle became a chaotic melee where ships fought at point-blank range. Marine Colonel Wusong led boarding parties onto enemy vessels using Thrank's tunneling equipment and Valari energy weapons. The close-quarters fighting was brutal, but the humans had trained for this type of combat. The hegemony crews surrendered when they realized they were fighting enemies who would never give up. Captain Hijin coordinated the final phase of the battle from her heavily damaged ship. The Hope was losing power and life support, but she kept fighting. Her crew worked by emergency lighting as they fired their last weapons at the retreating enemy. Valari contributed their most powerful attack. In the final moments, they focused the energy of their entire surviving population into one massive beam that struck the hegemony battleship Domination. The energy blast was so powerful it could be seen from neighboring star systems. When the battle ended, the space around the Nexus Point was filled with wreckage from both fleets. The hegemony had lost over 80 ships while the coalition had lost 31, but the surviving enemy vessels were retreating into hyperspace. The coalition had won, but at a terrible cost. The human fleet was down to its last few ships, and thousands of brave souls had died defending the right of 3 species to exist. Dr. Taemin worked for days treating the wounded while Engineer Sui-Young struggled to keep the surviving ships functional. The victory had consequences that reached across the galaxy. News of the battle spread rapidly, and other species began to question the hegemony's actions. The Galactic Council was in crisis, as members discovered that some of their own had been part of the genocide plot. Admiral Deng Haiyan received a message from the Reformed Council requesting negotiations. The surviving hegemony fleets had scattered, and their leadership was in hiding. The 3 target species were no longer facing extinction, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what had really happened. But the greatest victory was not military, it was moral. The coalition had proven that cooperation could triumph over conquest and that some things were worth any sacrifice. The humans had shown the galaxy that there was another way to live among the stars. Standing on the bridge of the Determination, Admiral Deng Haiyan looked out at the stars and thought about all those who had died to reach this moment. Captain Daewon and his crew aboard the Resilience, the Mokari submarine crews who had given their lives to break the enemy formation, Thrank's fighters who had swarmed the enemy ships, the Valari who had poured their life energy into their weapons. They had all died for the same reason, because they believed that every species deserved the right to exist. The galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the war ended, Ambassador Deng Haiyan stood in the Great Hall of the Reformed Galactic Council and looked out at representatives from hundreds of species. The old council had been dissolved after the truth about the hegemony conspiracy was revealed. Many of its members had been complicit in the attempted genocide, while others had simply been too cowardly to act. New council was different. It included representatives from the 3 species that were supposed to be extinct. The Valari delegate glowed with healthy light as she spoke about rebuilding her people's crystal cities. The Thrank's representative buzzed with excitement as he described the new hive colonies. The Mokari ambassador spoke through a methane-filled tank about the restoration of their ocean worlds, but the biggest change was in how the species related to each other. The war had shown that cooperation was stronger than competition, and that defending others was more important than defending only yourself. The Terran Coalition, as the human-led alliance had come to be known, welcomed any species that shared their values. D'Artagnan now headed the Coalition Medical Division and had established hospitals on dozens of worlds. His teams included human doctors, working alongside Valari healers, Thrinks, medical drones, and Mokari specialists. Each species contributed their unique knowledge to help all the others. Plague was completely gone now, cured by the combined efforts of human science and alien wisdom. The treatment centers had been converted into research facilities, where species that had been enemies for centuries worked together to solve problems that affected everyone. Engineer Sui-Young had become the Coalition's chief technology officer, and her workshops were marvels of interspecies cooperation. Human engineers worked with Velari energy specialists, Thranks, manufacturers, and Mokari. Environmental systems, the hybrid technologies they created, were more advanced than anything any single species could have built alone. The galaxy had learned that diversity was strength, human adaptability, combined with Velari energy mastery. Thranks' manufacturing precision and Mokari environmental expertise created possibilities that none of them could have achieved separately. Captain Hagen now commanded the Coalition flagship, New Hope, a vessel that incorporated the best technology from all four species. The ship was a symbol of what the galaxy could become when beings worked together. Instead of fighting each other, the war had also changed how conflicts were resolved. The Coalition had established rapid response teams that could intervene when species were threatened. The galaxy had learned that ignoring genocide was not just morally wrong, it was strategically dangerous. Fighter pilot Hagen had become a squadron leader in the Coalition Defense Force. Her pilots came from dozens of species and flew ships that combined multiple technologies, the sight of human Velari Thranks. And Mokari fighters flying in formation had become a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Hegemony still existed, but it was broken and scattered. Its member species had been expelled from the Reformed Council, and many of their leaders faced trial for war crimes. The conspiracy to commit genocide had been exposed, and the galaxy would never again tolerate such evil. But perhaps the most important change was in the spirit of galactic civilization. Before the war, most species had been focused on their own survival and advancement. They had competed for resources and territory without considering the cost to others. The humans had shown another way. It had proven that helping others was not weakness but strength, that sacrificing for strangers was not foolishness but wisdom, that standing up to bullies was not dangerous but necessary. The three species that had been targeted for extinction became the strongest supporters of the new way. The Velari used their energy mastery to power Coalition ships and stations. The Thranks used their manufacturing abilities to build homes and hospitals for refugees. The Mokari used their environmental expertise to terraform damaged worlds. Ambassador Dong Hyan often thought about the friends he had lost during the war. Captain Day One, who had led them into the quarantine zone. Dr. Taman, who had worked himself to death treating plague victims. The Mokari submarine crews, who had sacrificed themselves to break the enemy formation, had all died for the same principle, that some things were worth any sacrifice: the right of every species to exist, the duty to help those who could not help themselves, the responsibility to stand up against evil even when the odds were impossible. Galaxy was becoming something new, and better species that had been isolated for millennia were learning to work together. Problems that had seemed impossible were being solved by combined effort. Wars that had raged for centuries were ending in negotiated peace. The Coalition had grown from 18 human ships to an alliance of over 300 species. Each new member brought their own strengths and perspectives, making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Young beings from across the galaxy now studied at Coalition academies, where they learned not just science and technology, but also the values that made cooperation possible. They learned that strength came from helping others, that courage meant standing up for what was right, and that the greatest victories were those that saved lives rather than took them. The memorial on New Terra listed the names of all those who had died in the war. Human names were mixed with Velari Thranks and Mokari names in a long list that reminded everyone of the cost of freedom. The inscription at the top was simple but powerful: they died so that others might live. Dar Taman often visited the memorial when he was on New Terra. He would stand quietly and remember his friends who had given everything to save 3 species from extinction. The galaxy was a better place because of their sacrifice. War had ended, but the work continued. There were still species that needed help, refugees that needed homes, and worlds that needed healing. The Coalition responded to every call for aid because they had learned that turning away from suffering only made it worse. The greatest lesson of the war was that the galaxy belonged to all its inhabitants, not just the strong or the numerous. Every species had the right to exist and to flourish. The humans had shown that this principle was worth fighting for, even when the cost was terrible. As Ambassador Donghan addressed the Reformed Council, he looked out at the diverse assembly of beings who had come together to build a better galaxy. The Valari glowed with hope, the Thranks buzzed with excitement. The Makari swam peacefully in their methane tanks. And humans sat among them all, proud to be part of something greater than themselves. Galaxy had turned away when the weak needed help, but humans had chosen to stand and fight. In doing so, they had not just saved 3 species from extinction. They had saved the galaxy's soul and shown everyone that there was another way to live. Among the stars, the future was bright with possibility.